All right, so this assignment it's really, the last assignment was like a painterly, assignment. This one is going to be one that really focuses a lot more on realism and compositing. And so, and it's, the goal of this assignment is so that you can also like capture a moment in time that is a significant moment in time or an important moment in time. And so the idea of it is that it's a movie genre film still. And so whenever I scroll, it's probably going to take a second to refresh on your screen. So
Okay.
You can just follow along with me. But I'll go over the overview. I'm just going to kind of go over a lot in the page, and I'll skip over the things that, I think you don't need me to read or anything. But basically, for the overview, you're going to create a simple movie backstory. Like you're going to come up with your own backstory and plot, sort of like a really basic plot, and you're going to pick a genre of movie from the list that's provided on this assignment page. And and you'll have to depict it in a composited image that basically would be sort of like a frame grab. And
Okay.
the acceptable genres, and I really, really don't want people to deviate from this list because, like, for one thing, like, I don't want horror. Horror is not an option because it sort of is like the lowest common denominator. And,
Yeah.
the work that people tend to do whenever they choose horror is just, it's kind of like a, you can get some pretty bad low budget kinds of composites, right? So the idea is to actually take this assignment, and some of the stuff I'm saying for everybody, not just for you. But the idea is to take something that's an idea of a moment in time and actually really capture and embody the entire spirit of what the whole movie would be, but in an action sequence or some sort of sequence, right? And basically what you're going to do is you're going to interpret your invented, like it has to be invented, it's not something that already exists, so don't choose a movie that already exists in the world. You would interpret your invented film's backstory, and you're going to make a movie still frame landscape. And when I say landscape, what I mean by that is not necessarily an actual, pictorial landscape. A landscape can be anything. It can be an emotional landscape. It can be a cityscape. It could be a landscape in outer space. Like it could be a lot of different types of landscapes, right? And you're going to have to use a minimum of 5 or a maximum of 8 separate images. And again, it's really clear I don't want you to use an existing film story, so it has to be your own. And what you guys are going to do, excuse me, is create sort of like a little short paragraph blurb about the movie to help you kind of direct the kinds of images that you would go out and select for your composite. And just remember that you guys really need to be picking high resolution images because if you don't, the quality is not going to be good. So thinking about I mean, some people could get away with slightly lower res images for the last assignment if they were going to be using the mixer brush and stuff, but this one, everything's kind of got to really have a really good quality to it. Excuse me. And the final image, it should look realistic, although 3D styled kind of filtered computer graphic effects and fantasy scenes are acceptable, but they need to be modified enough that they really have like contribute to a new unique creation. So just like everything else in this class, it's really important that you don't go and find an image that is kind of like the perfect image and then you just sort of sprinkle stuff on top of it, right? That's not what we're going to be doing for this assignment. So that won't cut the mustard, right? It's got to really be something that is a unique creation of your own. You have to change it enough that it becomes your own work and it's not just a modification of someone else's. And one of the things that I'll say as just sort of a warning is even though Unsplash is a really good resource for graphics, the danger of using Unsplash images is that they are so well composed and they are so well refined and they're already kind of so perfect that sometimes it's really hard to re-envision a better way for that composition to look. And so that is a sort of a huge warning for everybody in the class in that, be very wary of using Unsplash images for this assignment because there's going to be a temptation to kind of really lean on the existing composition a lot. So you've really got to change it if you're going to use something that's really well composed to begin with. The other thing too is that I don't want any kind of cartoon animation, like no illustration, no cartoon styling.
Okay.
This really needs to be something that's supposed to be photorealistic, as if it's literally a scene from a movie that is not an animated movie, but is a scene from a movie like caught with a camera. Okay. I'm going to scroll the page a little bit. And the other thing too that I want to make really clear that this isn't supposed to be confused like with a movie poster. or a posed image. Like it's not going to be a publicity still. It's not going to be something you would see in a movie poster, like outside of a movie theater. It's intended to just be like sort of like an action shot that, like if you're watching a movie and you hit the pause button, right?
Okay.
So you can kind of hopefully understand like the difference, the significant difference between that, pushing a pause button while a movie is playing versus the kind of thing that you'd probably see on a movie poster in front of a theater, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Like no graffiti, nothing like posed or expected, more of like if you just like walked into the movie at a certain time.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and like no text. Text is not permissible. The only thing that you could use in terms of text in your in your composition is like if there's already text on a road sign or something like that, or maybe there's text on a building or something like that would be okay. But I don't want anybody to put text in here. And again, that sort of goes right along with the whole idea that this is not a movie poster, and it's not something that's posed. You would in a movie still, you wouldn't find a whole bunch of people just sort of posed together, like all making funny faces, like let's say it's a comedy,
Yeah.
It would be like, okay, all right. Okay, so let's, I'm going to just go over some of the tools and techniques. I mean, you guys can read this stuff, but we are going to talk about, camera raw color processing again. It's going to be some of the same things that you used before in your other assignments that are repeated, but you're going to kind of just be using them in different ways. So smart objects, smart filters, layers, color correction, advanced selections, all that kind of stuff, right? Advanced brushes and fills, that would be something, really helpful. When I say painting methods, I don't necessarily mean like painting like in the last project. When I say painting methods, there are a lot of ways to use paint tools that allow you to use, like, for instance, realistic looking brushes that maybe would help you create texture and stuff like that. So you can use painting methods for that. I'm going to skip down here to the process. So some ways that you guys can start thinking about, beginning this project is, first of all, you're going to need to come up with, obviously, your idea. But I want you to also think about some different ways how, you can make a single image convey a lot of different ideas and give cues about, like, not only what's happening in the scene, but also, like, the state of mind of the viewer, the state of mind of how, of the people in the scene. So if you're going to put people in the scene, if you're going to use images of people in the scene, you need to think about, like, what that's actually going to do to the effect of the image. And also, like, an overarching sense of what the movie's theme embodies, right? So those are the things that you need to think about whenever you're composing this, especially like this image needs to really capture the entire essence of the movie in one frame, and that's actually really hard to do.
Yeah.
But the thing about putting people in the film, and I've said this in other classes, that you've been in probably, but I'll say it again for the sake of being recorded right now, is that, the minute you put a person in a still frame, and if you put a single person in a still frame especially, if that person's not looking directly at the camera, they're like not engaging the viewer in a gaze, there's a tendency for people who are looking at this image to really identify with the individual that's in the image. And that's a pretty universal kind of experience. It's a universal theme that if there is a single figure, a single person in an image, a painting or a photograph or whatever in a scene, then the viewer tends to want to identify with that individual. It is different, however, if the individual is looking directly at the viewer, because then it's like you're almost like in a dialogue with the person who's in the image, like you're being challenged, or there's some reasons that person would be looking at you. So you're not necessarily going to identify with that person because now this person is another person who's engaging you.
Yeah, for sure.
And also the other thing too is when you start to add a lot of people to the image, it dramatically changes it. The minute you put a second person in a scene, it's a dramatically different thing. And so, so some of the things that can be challenging for people in this assignment is that, like, if you want to get something that's like a crowd scene, that's going to be really challenging to make it interesting in a single shot, single picture, because it's going to potentially be like lacking detail. Also, a crowd scene potentially is going to be something that's going to really engulf the entire composition. So it's going to be hard to not rely on the existing composition of an image if you're using something that's got, like, just a ton of people in it. So those are some things just to think about. All right, again, what not to do in the process, right? I already said don't create the equivalent of a movie poster. I absolutely do not want to see that. So your image should instead, it should be like a well-curated snapshot in time. I don't, like I just said, again, I don't want to see a scene that is littered with people or figures, right? Figures are people. And I just mentioned why. The other issue that I didn't really talk about is that some of the problems that you might have with that is that if you end up with separate image with a lot of people that have different light sources, it's going to be really hard to overcome the difference in light sources. Whenever you've already got a light source cast on a whole bunch of individual people, it's hard to change that light source.
Yeah.
Anyway, and if you do choose to use an image that has a lot of people in it, then it should be some kind of remarkable image. Like there should be a really remarkable reason, and you should be able to justify it in the context of what you're doing. The other thing I already mentioned is, don't choose a big single large background image that you're just going to drop in a bunch of smaller elements. That's just not going to do the job for this assignment. So you really need to find major graphic components of different images and really composite them together so that they sort of all take up a lot of, they create, each one of them contributes significantly to the foundation of the image. And I don't want you guys to include text, right? So those are all the do not do's, right? So I'm going to show you a few examples. And, like I said before, you can look at all of these as kind of like a landscape of sorts. They can be defined not only by dramatic distance and depth of field, right? But they can also be defined psychologically. Like you can have psychological landscapes, urban, suburban, surreal, space, pastoral, interior, domestic, etc., right? So here's some examples. And this is going to probably refresh at a potentially slower speed. So this is like, for instance, an example of something that could be considered a scene, this image. And you can see that it's photorealistic, but at the same time, it kind of has that slight 3D effect on it. This is actually from a real movie, from a movie called Retribution 3D. It's a sci-fi, so I'll go backwards. Another example would be something like this. This is actually another real movie, screen grab. It's The Lone Ranger. It's a Western adventure, right? And this is like actually a really good example of something that is a good screen grab because it captures probably the entire essence of this movie, right? Where there's this really interesting action, the composition is really interesting, your eye is moving a lot, it connects, it has a really good theme, and so forth, right? Okay, and so I'm not going to click through all of these. You guys can look through a lot of these. This is actually student work. This isn't a real movie, right? It gives you a sense, though, of the kind of thing that you might find in a film, right? But this is a composite. You can see that there are a lot of textures. This is something that is, yeah, it is. It's beautiful, right? But this wasn't from a real movie, but it looks like it could have been. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down, and then. This is why it's really important not to just go out and start finding images, but you really want to find your backstory. You want to develop your backstory first, because if you just go finding images, you're going to end up, potentially coming up with something that is really transparent. It's transparent that maybe it's not a very interesting idea, and it's just based on images that you found. So I'd like for you guys to really walk through the process in the way that I've outlined it. Okay, so you also have some requirements. The beginning and ending resolution of your composite should be 2560 pixels by 1440 at 72 ppi. That's pretty big. That is a really high resolution graphic. You might find other graphics that maybe they don't start out this large, but because you're not using the entire image, they will still translate to this scale. And so this assignment is also really going to help you guys understand resolution a lot better too, just like some of the others, where you want to start with an empty container that you've defined at this size, and then you're going to bring your other stuff in to this initial document. Because if you start with, like, say, somebody else's file and you just start dropping stuff in there, well, if the resolution's not good, the resolution of all the other images is going to conform to that initial file's resolution. So the best idea in terms of like how you should start the actual compositing process is to create a blank document that is 2,560 pixels by 1440 pixels at 72 ppi, and then bring everything into that. And then that way you'll see what the actual scale of the pictures will be in the size of the document that I'm telling you that you need to make. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, great.